Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charmley, and this is another video about a historic Shropshire church. This is one of those churches where we know precisely who built it. It was Bishop Robert Burnell, Bishop of Bath and Wells, who built the church in the 1280s. It was completed in time for a meeting of the House of Commons. So here in this building worshipped the House of Commons in 1285. The building today is in many ways much as it was. There was a Victorian restoration, which has of course done what the Victorian restorations do, but it was a relatively sympathetic one, and much of the medieval and later fabric can be seen today. So let's have a look around Bishop Robert's magnificent parish church. As we said, Robert Burnell had this built in 1285 or so. It was finished then. The font is still original, and this is you can see it's an adaptation of the Norman tub style. The windows are still these lancets with their little fancy heads. The main entrance is now the north porch, north door. There was a south door. There is still a west door, but that's a processional entrance. And so here we have it moving slowly down the church. Unfortunately, it's quite a triptych area, but moving slowly. You can see here there are transepts on both sides. The transepts reflect the importance of the building, but they are transepts that are built on. Now here we have medieval wall painting, very interesting. Painting that reflects somebody coming in behind me. Hopefully it won't be too. But here's medieval wall painting. You can see this is just the floriated version, just some red flowers painted on the wall. Medieval tomb recess. You can see there was a chapel here. This is quite interesting, and you can see how the piscina is made. They've chopped away the front, and so you see here are the drains. They go down into the walls, because the idea was that you're washing out the holy vessels from communion, and so the holy residue has to stay within the church, and so it drains into the church walls, thus not corrupting anything, and certainly not corrupting it. And the south transept here is noted for its memorials. Be careful. Here we have, there's a number to the Smith family. Now the Smiths are interesting because they were Roman Catholics, and yet they are still buried here, although they would have their own chapel in the hall, in memory of Lieutenant William Smith of Waldeck's Dragoons in the service of Austria, third son of Sir Edward Smith. You see, Roman Catholic, so fighting for the Austrians. He was killed on the 1st December 1794 by a cannonball at the siege of Mentz, a victim to valour in defence of religion and humanity. He felt regret by his fellow soldiers and lamented by his friends. Age 24, R.I.P., which is, of course, a Roman Catholic. May he rest in peace, may he repose in peace. That's one of the 13th century people. More Smiths at this point. This is from 1716, and there's no indication, in spite of the reality, that this was a Roman Catholic family. They inherited, I believe, the house. But the Lees here have these two enormous memorials. 1591, you can see here the lion at his feet, and the sons behind, and there's his son and heir in armour. And then on this side we have Humphrey Lee, and Humphrey Lee, they have the one son and the 5 daughters, and all the daughters, all the girls, look slightly different because, of course, they do. They're real people. They're not just ornamental figures. And here we have the Lee as Humphrey and Clarissa kneeling at prayer. This is early 17th century, and again it reflects this approach of the period, where it's a very Protestant memorial, very different from this memorial here. This is probably the finest medieval brass in Shropshire. It's very difficult for me to get an image of it on the camera, but I should try, and there we are. This is Sir Nicholas Burnell. He was a knight in the reign of Richard II, and the armour really reflects a slightly earlier period. He's slightly battered, but you get his armour. It's plate over mail. These memorials become very interesting as ways in which we can get an idea of what armour looked like. One of the things it means is we know a lot more about what civilian clothing was like for women in the past than we do men, because of course if you were anyone important as a man, you had yourself shown in armour, like the Lees, which is all very well, but it's interesting also to know the way that the gentlemen dressed when they were not in armour. You have here is a little dog coming out of his gauntlet, but his lion, his old little lion. The church has been little altered in form, at least in the 19th century, when someone decided to whack on a new porch and a new tower, but that's all. So I move back across here. And so this is made by Bishop Burnell, and we have up here, that is a portrait, contemporary portrait of Richard. You can tell he's got his mitre on, so we know it's him. And on the other side, there is a clergyman in a square cap. There's a monk up there, and a noble lady with her face partially covered. There's a gentleman there, another gentleman there, but we can tell this is Richard because this is Robert rather, because he's got his mitre on, so he is dressed as a bishop. And here is the king. Whether this is original, I think it probably is original. So here is the king, who of course gave him his post as Bishop of Bath and Wells. Also, he was the chancellor to the king, so he was somebody for whom royal service was very important to him. So the chancel again reflects this 13th century date of the building. Late 13th century, these grouped lancets as at Longnaw and nearby Pitchford, and looking west, and like Longnaw and Pitchford, it's a long building, but they've added these two transepts. Now, this is what's called a low side window. There's all kinds of ideas about them, but we really don't know. They've quite often, and again, it's the Middle Ages, so people talk about these and they say, well, maybe it's for lepers. Well, it's unlikely that it's for lepers here in a church that was built for a bishop and has a castle next to it. It's much more likely that it's to do with people being able to look in and see the elevation of the host, but unlikely to be lepers. And here we have King Edward I, the king who Bishop Burnell served, and there is Robert Burnell on the other side. And it's the only figurative glass of the entire building. The east window is coloured glass, but not patterned in any way. And here we have more memorials. This is to early 19th century. And then below a later one, you can see again that this tendency for families to hold a living. You have a double piscina, so remember this is an important church because you've got a castle next to it, and the castle belongs to a bishop. This is a place where Parliament met. It's a place where the bishop would be expected to be able to entertain the king, among other things. And so it's somewhere that has to be able to deal with high class, high status clerics as well as noblemen. Hence a double piscina And then on the other side there is a more decorative type of aumbry. And then we have this brass up there, Victorian brass, Victorian line, and the radiator, because of course decorative radiator grills. You need them, need to heat the building, and why not make them decorative at the same time? The woodwork is largely Victorian, although it does certainly imitate and probably incorporate Jacobean material. So there we are, and there's the altar standing altar-wise. But it's not a very high church setup. It's very impressive in its own way. So go outside then. In fact, before we go outside, there's something else in the south transept the north transept that's interesting, which is the floor, which is medieval floor tiles. And this is what the whole church would have been floored with originally. These patterned and incised tiles, they would have been made locally, there would have been a kiln, and all of this is done. This is a very high status building because this is the bishop's church. This is Bishop Burnell's personal project, and it's here to impress the king. There's the pulpit, which is made up of Jacobean work, and the Jacobean period is really the period for pulpits in the Church of England. And the chancel, of course, is particularly fine. Now, the guide says, oh, maybe they got more enthusiastic as they went further. No, it's that the chancel's more important. It's a bishop's church. He's the bishop. He's a clergyman. The chancel is more important. It is in a medieval church, it's the holy end. Here again we have King Edward and his queen on the other side, which would of course have impressed the king when and if he came to visit. So we process back to the back of the building, and then we shall have a quick tour of the outside. Here we are, War Memorial, and again you've got the captain at the top and the ordinary soldiers further down. It is a magnificent structure. The roof isn't terribly old, but it does imitate older ones. So let's have a look around the outside. So here we are in the porch, and the first thing we see is the Roll of Honour. Now, it was interesting because you see these war memorials, and very often they're simply those who were killed, but here we have also those who came back, and you can see, in fact, many more came back than went out. An interesting position here is Mr. S. Reynolds, who was a farrier sergeant, that is, he was in charge of horses, which of course is very important even then. W.R. Gwilliam was a wheeler. One suspects that E.T. is his brother, and he was a sapper. So all the various ranks, two captains, C.W. Bruce and R.W.O.J. Bruce, who would have been his brother, both served. And here we have another old font. Now, given the font in the church is very old, I'm not sure where this comes from, but it is a notable old font now being used as a planter. And why not? Another wonderfully overgrown graveyard. They're always it's done to encourage wildflowers and to encourage plants. So we turn around, and there is the West End. I mean, look at that. Is it not magnificent? And transept. You see here the transepts are basically stuck on the outside. They're not keyed in the way that some are, and later examples are, and it's an easy way to do things. Again, we've got these faces, old lady and a young lady and an old lady. The old hall is now a school, and hence all these buildings along here. But when the Smiths were there, of course, they were Roman Catholic, so it was a centre of recusancy. That's the heating plant in the basement, which once again we emphasise is not a theological statement. This is the tower. The tower is a Victorian addition. It's difficult to photograph, and it's not all that interesting. And there we have, you see, this archway there with the low side window in it, which is very strange, because low side windows are usually in a different position And here's the castle. This is Acton Burnell Castle. This is where Bishop Burnell lived, and this is where he entertained the king, among other guests. Here we go, the transept, round onto the... So one of the things is, because the castle is where it is, it's rather difficult to get pictures, and certainly film footage of the church from certain angles. The castle was, you can see from its condition, it's in fairly good condition, except that most of it's roofless. And very simply, it's because it fell out of fashion, and castles ceased to be popular, and instead people wanted big country houses with bigger rooms, and so the castle simply abandoned and a new country house built. But here's the church, and St Mary's here, and as we pan along here, here's the castle. You can imagine Bishop Burnell would be able to go straight from his castle to his church, and you see the magnificent chancel, and there the simpler nave. And it's simpler because it's the nave, it's where the common people sit. It's that there's to be a kind of procession from the west to the east, and the east is supposed to draw the eyes of the congregation. It's nothing as complicated as the guidebook tries to make it. It's simply that this is the posher end because this is the focus. This is where you're supposed to be looking. You're sitting in the nave, but you're looking to the chancel. So this is a church, as say, it has its moment, which is in Bishop Robert's day, and then when Bishop Robert goes his way and leaves and dies, goes the way of all flesh. There we are, that would have been Bishop Robert's south door. And when he goes the way of all flesh, then the church ceases to be this very important building, because the Burnell family, now this is a man after all who is a bishop, he's a celibate clergyman, so therefore the Burnell family doesn't have the sort of importance in terms of inheritance that they would have if he were, for example, to have been a secular noble, a knight, because he must, as a celibate priest, pass on without issue. And here we are at the West End, of course being the front. You can see again this very simple yet grand style that is the early pointed or the early English. Well, so there we are, that's St Mary's, Acton, Burnell. I hope you have found the video interesting, and it is a most fascinating little building, a building that's importance is out of all proportion to its size, simply because in 1285 Parliament meets here. There was a barn at the castle where they met. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy this video, and I shall carry on making more of them and making other videos of different types as well. But thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you. Amen.